Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good evening. It is it's 10:30. I changed my time on my show here tonight. 10:30 p.m. Calgary, Alberta, and I'm happy to be here. This is Child Abuse Prevention and Human Rights Abuse Prevention is Up to Us, and it's a 30-minute live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. And I wanted to continue talking about PDF that I saw. We were looking at it on Wednesday night and Monday night from Child Welfare Information Gateway. And that is, I'll give you the link. It's www.childwelfare.gov/pubs, P-U-B-S, /user manuals /foundation/foundation.pdf. And it's a child abuse and neglect user manual series. It's a coordinated response to child abuse and neglect, and the Foundation for Practice. And this was put out by I'll just read who's actually put this out. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Administration for Children and Families, Administration on Children, Youth and Families, Children's Bureau, and Office on Child Abuse and Neglect. And it's great PDF. It's 114 pages long. It's really rather current. That's why I like it. It's up to date. It's not too old. Some of the information that we find out there is quite old. Even though it's still good, it's nice to see some more current stuff. And so that's what we're looking at, and I'm glad to be able to continue to do these shows. I'm not a professional counselor or therapist or anything like that. I'm just a private citizen that pays to do my own blog talk shows, because I really feel that child abuse is not talked about enough. And even though there are people out there talking about it, thank God, there needs to be more people talking about it. And that's why I just wanted to be one more voice to add to all the others out there who have been talking about this and have been doing the work, and for every single person out there who's ever done anything to try to stop child abuse, I'm so thankful. And I just wanted to instead of sit on the sidelines and say, how much I was unhappy with what I was seeing and how much I knew, the problem of child abuse existed as I grew up abused as a child. So firsthand, I knew it was out there. I knew it was happening. I knew lots of kids who were abused when I was young. And I just, was tired of sitting on the couch saying, oh, it's great, somebody else is doing the work. And I thought, why am I not helping? Why am I not saying anything? You know what I mean? Pretty much because I had never wanted to come out public with my story, and I knew that if I was going to get involved, it would be in public speaking, and I knew that if I was going to do that, then I would have to be 100% honest, because I knew that someday the question would come to me, have you ever experienced child abuse on a personal level? And I was either going to have to be honest and say, yes, I have, or hide behind a pack of lies, which is what most abuse involves, which is lies and cover-ups, right? And I thought, no, I'm just going to tell my story, tell it like it is, and just be one more voice out there to say that we need to stop child abuse. And I'm so happy to be able to do these shows. And, I had no idea how long I'd be doing these shows. And I started last November, and at the end of November there, and didn't know how long I'd keep going, but I have over 8,000, almost 8,300 shows listened to. So somebody's listening, and I really appreciate everybody who's tuning into all my shows. Thank you very much for being here and for checking out the archives and just, taking a look at what I'm talking about. I really appreciate it. And, most of you are probably my friends, and I consider you my family, really. And some of you, I don't even know who you are, but I thank you so much for tuning in to all my shows. And so we'll get right into this article. I just ask that people listen at their own discretion. Topics of abuse are very sensitive. So, if you feel that it might bother you, you have to turn the show off, right? You have to listen at your own discretion. And you know what's good for you to listen to, and if it makes you uncomfortable, then you would not be hurting my feelings at all if you turn the show off. And if you're a young person under the age of 18, I really ask that you have permission to listen to my show. That's my disclaimer. Not only that, but I'm fighting for children's lives, and honestly, you have to keep yourself safe online. You really should let an adult know what you're doing online. And since my show has a lot of adult material on it, adult content, I really think that children and young people should have someone listen to the show with them. And that way they can sort of say, yeah, okay, it's something you can listen to, or no, I don't think it's age appropriate for you. So just because of the topic of abuse is kind of scary for young people, especially if they haven't heard a whole lot about it, which most people wouldn't. If they didn't grow up abused and you haven't heard a whole lot about it, then it might be something that's quite scary for you to listen to. And so, that's the whole issue. Abuse is not talked about. The only time we ever hear anything about abuse is in, I say this almost every show, and that's because it's the truth. Really, it's just the headlines. That's all we ever see, headlines of children being killed or murdered at the hands of their parents or caregivers, or if they're not killed, they're in the hospital due to abuse-related injuries, right? This is what we're seeing out here. Then we see no more, we hear no more. There's no talk about prevention of child abuse. I mean, there might be the odd article in some small-town newspaper, which should be made nationwide, front page, front and center. It needs to be on every magazine cover. It needs to be on every television show running. There needs to be something to do with child abuse prevention, and for parents to know that they can get help. They do not have to abuse their children. Abuse is a choice, and they have the choice to not abuse their children. So they need help, right? Obviously. But who needs more help? The children do. And so I fight for children's rights, and that's why I ask all young people to get someone to listen to the show with you, whether it's a family member that you trust, a parent, a caregiver, a guardian, a friend, a neighbor, coach, someone who can listen to the show with you to help you decide whether or not you should be listening, right? So we'll get right into the show here. This PDF is awesome, and we were talking about they were talking about physical abuse, physical neglect, and whatnot, and we were kind of going through over that. It was on page, I believe, 26, 27 of this actual PDF. And so I'm just scrolling down there right now, sort of pick up where we left off on Wednesday night. And, they had some different stuff in this article, which I really liked because it had a lot to do with neglect, like physical neglect and emotional neglect, right? Just the whole idea of neglect, right? So it's really quite interesting because neglect is quite often not talked about. It's not seen as serious as abuse, right? So a lot of times people forget that neglect is abuse, and it's lumped in there in the category of abuse, right? So there's physical child abuse, sexual child abuse, verbal child abuse, emotional child abuse, psychological child abuse, and neglect. It's always thrown in there at the end, right? But neglect is actually the most common of all of those, right? It's sadly true that there are so many neglected children out there. And it's just so sad because parents, for whatever reason, or caregivers just can't seem to do right by their children. So even if there's no physical abuse, no sexual abuse, there can be, or no emotional abuse, there can be neglect. And within that neglect, a child can suffer physically, they can suffer emotionally, right? Neglect is really serious, and it's a real problem. And so it's good to take a look at this stuff. Just to know the signs and symptoms really would be the best thing for everybody. To know the signs and symptoms of abuse, what to look at, what to look for, right? If you have a lot of children in your life and you work with children, or if you're surrounded by children because you have children, so your children have a lot of friends, and maybe they attend sports, after school sports types of things, right, where they're off to the soccer games, they're off to the baseball games, or football, or hockey, or whatever they play, and you're around these kids, right? It's a good idea to know the signs and symptoms of abuse, and then to know how to report it. You never know when a child is going to come to you and disclose that they're being abused. That can happen. 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys will be abused sexually under the age of 18. So this, not that they will always come and tell you, but if you know the signs and symptoms, you could save a child's life, really, believe me. We need to all know the signs and symptoms of all the different types of abuse, right? And then know how to report it properly, and we could save a child's life. And we could save a child from a lifetime of abuse and neglect, right, and horror. So it's very important that we all get involved, right? Children, they need us. They really do. And where do we leave off here? Well, emotional neglect, I think we covered some of that, but we'll start at emotional neglect. And they talk about all the different types of emotional neglect. There's inadequate nurturing or affection, which is marked inattention to the child's need for affection, emotional support, or attention. So, that's a parent who's just not meeting that child's needs as far as affection goes, emotional support, or attention. Chronic or extreme spouse abuse, exposure to chronic or extreme spouse abuse or other domestic violence in the child's presence. That's another form of emotional neglect. Delay in psychological care, failure to seek or provide needed treatment for a child's emotional or behavioral impairment or problem that any reasonable layman would have recognized as needing professional psychological attention, such as like suicide attempt, right? That's also emotional neglect. And they talk about refusal of psychological care. That's refusal to allow needed and available treatment for a child's emotional or behavioral impairment or problem in accordance with a competent professional recommendation, and which is very important, right? Have to get children some help if they need help, right? It's really a form of abuse if a parent doesn't get their child some help. If they know they need help and they don't do it, that's abuse. Permitted other maladaptive behaviors, which is encouragement or permitting of other maladaptive behaviors, chronic delinquency, severe assault, under circumstances where the parent or caregiver has reason to be aware of the existence and seriousness of the problem, but does not intervene. This is kind of where we left off on Wednesday night, because I was talking about my brother. I love my brother dearly, but he was a drug user, heavy-duty drug user, when he was young, and he had done so many drugs, he kind of blew his mind, and he was just having so many problems, and he was hooked, so he was always trying to rob pharmacies. He was robbing people's homes for drugs, not for money, because he wanted to buy drugs, but mainly he would steal prescription medicine from people, and then he would just take it all and then go find some more or buy some more or steal some more, right? So he was always looking for drugs. And he actually, I was talking about this on Wednesday night, that my brother had held a knife to my sister's throat because she wouldn't take him to go do a robbery. He wanted her to drive him to a pharmacy so he could rob it, and then he wanted her to do this for her, and she didn't want to be involved in any illegal activity, and she was like saying no. And then my brother held a knife to her throat, and my mom asked me to actually try to get him to put the knife down, right? And I was like 5 years younger than my sister and 7 years younger than my brother. So my sister I was probably, I don't know, I'd say about 12. At least I was somewhere around 12. So my sister would have been 17. My brother would have been 19. So there's my brother doing this in our living room, and it took me a couple hours to get him to put the knife down. But my sister ended up driving him, but then she just dropped him off, and he took off, and of course he went to do this robbery thing, right? So it was absolutely horrible. And my mom just put up with it. My mom just didn't do anything about it. And, of course, my brother got busted. And, my parents would just not get my brothers any help, But they had already been brought up on abuse charges, and so the whole thing was just a big mess. And it would have been too late to remove them from the home. I would have been removed from the home. But the thing is my parents didn't want to get them any help. They couldn't help themselves, and they certainly couldn't help their children. So that's the sad part, right? Many times parents just cannot help themselves and cannot help their children, and therefore they're putting their children at danger and at risk, And if they're not, there's just a whole lot of emotional, psychological damage done in that situation, even if there wasn't physical abuse, whereas in my case there was. But even if there wasn't, the absence of physical or sexual abuse, that psychological and emotional damage from that kind of stuff is very hard on children. And then you throw in sexual abuse and physical abuse, and it just makes it that much harder. And so then you just have a whole huge mess on your hands with that child. You know what I mean? So this is why it's so important for parents to get help, and not let their family spiral downward like that. And we were looking at Spotlight on Chronic Neglect. And this is where they were saying that this one lady, Susan J. Zurabin, Z-U-R-A-B-I-N, from the University of Maryland at Baltimore School of Social Work, she recommended that this is a part of this article here, right? It says she recommends that if some behaviors occur in a chronic pattern, they should be considered neglectful. For example, examples include lack of supervision, inadequate hygiene, failure to meet a child's educational needs, and this suggests that rather than focusing on individual incidents that may or may not be classified as neglectful, one should look at an accumulation of incidents that may together constitute neglect. And that's very important, and I like what this lady has to say, and I should do some more reading up on what she's talking about there, because that is so true, right? It's the whole, it's the total that should be looked at, not one particular incident that they because quite often, as far as neglect goes, if the case doesn't meet the criteria for neglect, it's thrown out. It has to meet a certain criteria, right? So, but if you have all of these things all together, it should be looked at as neglect. And so it'd be interesting to see how far she got and what's come of her actual findings, right? Because this is serious. Kids are at risk, and kids are at risk for so much. Most of these kids that we see on the street, running around doing drugs and hanging out in the middle of the night, do not come from good homes. Some do. So that's a fact, but then some don't. And so the ones that do need to go home and behave themselves. And the ones that don't, half the time they're safer on the street, believe it or not. And that's so sad. And well, maybe they aren't safer on the street. They're just as much as danger, because I know I used to be running around on the streets. But the thing is they're just as much, and I was at danger, so I was in danger, right? Anything could have happened. So I'm not promoting that. But what I'm saying is some of these kids' lives are threatened at home. And so if they don't, if they go home, they stand a chance of being beaten to death, strangled, choked, beaten to death, right? Whereas if they stay out on the street somewhere, they might find a safe place to sleep, right? And this is very sad, but you know what? This is reality. And it's unfortunate, because I used to feel safer on the streets quite often than in my own home, because I was worried about my dad killing us all because he was psychologically he had mental problems, right? So he was always talking about killing the family when we were sleeping, right? So I was always pretty nervous to be sleeping in that house, and never knew when something was going to go on and somebody was going to be trying to kill themselves or run down the freeway or try to kill themselves. It was just absolutely crazy. So I always felt a little bit safer out running around than I did in my own home. So a lot of children do, I'm sure, a lot of young people do. And it's sad because they're not safer. Then they're set up for to become part of this whole sad situation of missing children who are exploited and end up in sex slave trade rings and pornography rings, and it's just absolutely horrible. And then they find these murdered children, years later. They find their bodies somewhere. Right? Absolutely horrible what's going on out there. We really need to fix this situation. Everybody's got to get involved somewhere, somehow. And that's why I'm saying I'm glad I got off the couch. 3 years ago I said, that's it. I'm tired of sitting here just looking at all this and saying, well, it's good that some people are helping, but I don't like what I'm seeing. And yet, look at all these great people out here doing all this wonderful work. Well, how come I'm sitting on the couch? I should be out there helping these people. You know what I mean? Like, this is ridiculous. We all should be doing something. And for every person out there who is doing something, thank you so much. And you know what? I'm so happy to be standing with you as part of the change that we want to see for this world, right? And it's going to take all of us, and that's the sad part, because there'll be so many that will not participate and that just don't care. And but for every one of them, there's probably 2 or 3 that do care, and so that's great. That's what we need. And they said here, one study found that many children who had been referred to CPS for neglect did not receive services because their cases did not meet the criteria for incidence of neglect. So that's what I was just talking about. We had kind of gone over this on Wednesday night. It also found, however, that all of these children had, in fact, suffered severe developmental consequences. In recognition of this issue, the Missouri Division of Family Services has assigned one of its CPS staff as a chronic neglect specialist. And this office defines chronic neglect as, quote-unquote, a persistent pattern of family functioning in which the caregiver has not sustained and or met the basic needs of the children, which results in harm to the child. And the focus here is on the accumulation of harm, quote-unquote. So that's awesome, and that's good that they did that. And I wish every single division of family services would do that, have a CPS person, a staff member set up that just handles straight chronic neglect cases. Because chronic neglect is abuse, really, and it can quite often lead to more abuse, right? If there's a family that is suffering and the children are suffering, then you know that's a family that's in crisis, and they are going to need some serious help in order to prevent abuse. That's what we're trying to do, prevent child abuse, right? Then they go on to talk about psychological maltreatment. And psychological maltreatment, also known as emotional abuse and neglect, refers to a repeated pattern of caregiver behavior or extreme incidents that convey to the children that they are worthless, flawed, unloved, unwanted, endangered, or only of value in meeting another's needs. Summarizing research and expert opinion, Stuart N. Hart, Ph.D., and Marla R. Broussard, Ph.D., present the 6 categories of psychological maltreatment. Oh yeah, we did kind of go over some of this. Spurning, which is belittling, hostile, rejecting, and ridiculing. Terrorizing, this is threatening violence against a child, placing a child in a recognizably dangerous situation. And they list here isolating, which is confining the child, placing unreasonable limitations on the child's freedom of movement, restricting the child from social interactions. Exploiting or corrupting is another one, and that's modeling antisocial behavior such as criminal activities, encouraging prostitution, permitting substance abuse. Denying emotional responsiveness, which is ignoring the child's attempts to interact, failing to express affection. And mental health, medical and educational neglect, which is refusing to allow or failing to provide treatment for serious mental health or medical problems, ignoring the need for services for serious educational needs. And these are all some serious problems, I'm telling you. And this is what kids are going through every day. And if not a whole lot worse, we see a whole lot worse actually. But this is what so much abuse is just not looked at as abuse, and it really is abuse, right? And it's sad that people would think that it's okay to treat children like that, right? It says to warrant intervention, psychological maltreatment must be sustained and repetitive. It says for less severe acts such as habitual scapegoating or belittling, demonstrable harm to the child is often required for CPS to intervene, because emotional abuse is very hard to prove. So it has to, they're looking for something tangible, something that they could see and report, document, right? So unless they have, something serious, seriously like provable, then they quite often just they can't intervene. Emotional abuse, when you look into most of the articles regarding that, is the hardest type form of abuse to prove, because there's no marks, there's no physical evidence, and it's all psychological, right? So someone would have had to have been a witness, and it's a little bit harder to get these people on these charges, these parents, right, who emotionally abuse their children. They do it, they can do it, but the thing is it is harder for CPS and them to intervene. I've seen that on other websites as well. It says psychological maltreatment is the most difficult form of child maltreatment to identify. In part, the difficulty in detection occurs because the effects of psychological maltreatment, such as lags in development, learning problems, speech disorders, are often evident in both children who have experienced and those who have not experienced maltreatment. Additionally, the effects of psychological maltreatment may only become evident in later developmental stages of the child's life. And they said here, although any of the forms of child maltreatment may be found alone, they often occur in combination. And psychological maltreatment is almost always present when other forms are identified. So yeah, that's because, with physical abuse, child physical abuse, sexual abuse, there will always be psychological, emotional damage done by that, even though there's physical damage as well. And even with the sexual abuse, right, there's always going to be some there will be some emotional damage and psychological damage with all the different types of abuse, right? So that's why, that's just so horrible. They have case examples of maltreatment. This website, you can check this out, www.childwelfare.gov/pubs, PUBS, /user manuals, /foundation, /foundation.pdf. And they talk about case examples of different types of abuse, right, just so people will have an idea of what abuse really is, right? And they talk about physical abuse, child sexual abuse, child psychological abuse, as well as child neglect. And they give like a case study for each one of those. And you can read those when you go online. I'm not going to read through those. They said, what is the scope of the problem? Each year, hundreds of thousands of children in the United States are victims of maltreatment. Knowledge of the scope of the problem is drawn primarily from data reported by State Child Protective Service, which is CPS, agencies to the National Child Abuse and Neglect Data System, which is the NCANDS. And not all maltreatment, however, is known by the authorities. This chapter summarizes the 2000 NCANDS findings related to the number and characteristics of child maltreatment victims and perpetrators, reported to CPS, and also discusses estimates of the actual incidence of abuse and neglect, including incidences that are not reported to CPS. This was from the year 2000, right? So this is still quite old, right? But some of the articles out there are really old, like 1992, 1987, right? So we're always kind of looking for the more up-to-date ones. But this one had some different stuff on it. That's why I thought I would take a look at it. Reported child maltreatment victims, it says the number of children actually maltreated is unknown. In 2000, so that's in the year 2000, 10 years ago, there were an estimated 879,000 victims of maltreatment nationwide, and the term victims refers to those children who were found by CPS to have experienced abuse or neglect, substantiated cases, right? So these would be substantiated cases, not the ones they weren't sure about or whatever. During that same year, an estimated 3 million referrals were made to CPS. So that was in the year 2000. 3 million referrals were made to CPS regarding one or more children in a family, and nearly 2/3 of the referrals were screened in for investigation of potential maltreatment. Screened in indicates that the referral was deemed appropriate for investigation or assessment based on state statutes. So isn't that something? 3 million referrals, and they only see about 1/3 of those, right? The CPS process for screening referrals, conducting investigations, and substantiating maltreatment are described further in Chapter 9. What does the child protection process look like? It says for every 1,000 children in the population in the year 2000, approximately 12 were victims of maltreatment, and that's terrible. It doesn't matter. One is too many, if you ask me. 12 out of 1,000. Well, we know right now the stats across the board are 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused under the age of 18, and that means anything from unwanted sexual touching to sexual assault, right? Anything in between. And that's just about the stats for physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse. It's all about the same. Between 1 in 3, 1 in 4 girls, and between 6 and 7 boys. So, that's too many. When you think about that, that's way too many. And that's the stats, and that's based on the material that they have today. And that's the stats going around that are probably from 2009 or 2008, so that's way more current. And it's just from the reporting. So they don't even know what the real stats are because abuse is underreported. So we have to keep that in mind as well. And let's see, they talk about types of maltreatment and the numbers, like to give the actual stats on it. Characteristics of victims, fatalities, child maltreatment perpetrators, who's doing the perpetrating, non-reported child abuse and neglect, key sources of child abuse and neglect statistics, and then the next portion of this article goes down and talks about what factors contribute to child abuse and neglect. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that also on Monday night. And so, I hope you can tune in Monday night. I'll be back on this weekend. I have a couple of shows. Tomorrow I have Worldwide Epidemic of Child Abuse and Human Rights Abuses, and that'll be tomorrow morning. I think I'm going to change the time on that, though, and bump it up to around 9:30 or something. So I'm just going to move it up a couple of hours. It's scheduled for 7:30, but I think I'm going to bump it up just a little bit later. And Sunday I have Mount Bethel Christian Fellowship and Worship Bible Study, and then Monday morning, one child abuse survivor to another, again at 6 o'clock a.m. in the morning, and I hope you can tune in. Monday night, Dreamcatchers Talk Radio, www.blogtalkradio.com/Dreamcatchers. Elizabeth Brawley, the Southern Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and myself will be on. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. We're going to have a special guest on the show, Lindsay Tolson, and she is a survivor. She's an author. She has a website. She helps people. She helps so many people with her work and trying to help survivors of abuse. And she has a book out. She's written a book, and it's called Beyond the Tears, A True Survivor Story. And I hope I got that right. And I've yet to read it. I haven't read her book yet, but I have actually checked out her website. And I hope you will join us 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's Elizabeth Brawley. Myself will be interviewing Lindsay Tolson. And it's just going to be awesome to talk to her. She's a very busy woman, and she's very busy on many talk shows. She does a lot of speaking, and she's very busy helping people. That's what she does. And so I hope you will tune in and listen to her story and listen to what she has to say about her book and what she's doing now. And she's a survivor, and I'm telling you, we're going to be so happy to have her on the show. So I hope you can tune in for that. I hope you will also take a listen to John Harrison's Blog Talk Radio show here on Blog Talk Radio, www.blogtalkradio.com/B, the letter B, SAFE, S-A-F-E, first, the number 1, S-T, always, and then that's Be Safe First Always on Blog Talk Radio. John Harrison is a survivor. He is a poet. He's an author, a published author. He is an advocate for victims of child abuse, which we like to call survivors. He's also an advocate to stop child abuse, and he's going to be at the UK rally against child abuse here coming up in August. And I hope you will check out his website as well. And make sure you take a listen to what he's got to say on his Blog Talk Radio shows. I really love to listen to John, and I'm glad that he's doing shows on Blog Talk Radio. His voice is so important. It's so powerful. And what he has to say is exactly what we're all saying, which is we really need to work on this to stop child abuse and to help survivors of child abuse, right? We really have to do everything that we can. And not only that, but he's just a really nice guy, and I hope everybody will take a listen to what he's got to say. And he's on throughout the week, but you can check out his archives. He's usually on Fridays, so make sure you do check out his archives and check out his website as well. We're gonna be talking to John real soon on Dreamcatchers Talk Radio. So take care, everybody. Have a great weekend and take care of yourselves. And we'll be talking to you real soon. If you have any questions or you need any kind of information, you can get a hold of me here on Blog Talk Radio or on Facebook. I'm usually around, and I'll be around this weekend. So take care of yourselves, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.